Interestingly as well, if you go on Google and look at some of the reviews for the Cecil Hotel, there's some funny people that like have retrospectively put a review in for like 10 years ago saying, I stayed there, it was awful.
Should we read a couple?
See if you can get a couple.
Yeah. So, Cecil Hotel, stay on Main.
Mm-hmm.
So, Rosie Batty, oh God, woke up to a man staring at me. He was right in my face, but he said he worked there and was making sure I was okay.
That's really considerate.
It is. So I'm pretty sure it was just routine. I felt pretty comfortable for the most part, apart from when he smelt my hair. Depends what your boundaries are. Would recommend beds are a bit springy though.
Bit springy.
13 people mark that one useful.
Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of troublesome tales from downtown LA that have led to speculation of a century-long curse on the Cecil Hotel, awarding it the title of one of the most dangerous hotels in the world.
I think it should be Cecil.
I have to correct myself every time because I see Cecil, but then I hear other people or Americans say Cecil, and it just sounds...
What is that about?
It's weird. Is that actually, if a person was called Cecil, would they call him Cecil?
Ooh. It doesn't sound right, does it?
No. I think of seesaw.
Yeah, that's true, actually. It's definitely Cecil.
Cecil. Well, we'll be calling it the Cecil Hotel today.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just tuning in, my name's Adam Cox, who today will be putting on my CSI detective skills as I attempt to solve whether the curse of the Cecil Hotel is true and why it's such a hotbed for crime in LA.
Okay. It's Cecil. And you're listening to The Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. We are a weekly variety podcast where I, Kyle Reese, ordinarily tell Adam Cox all about a topic that I think you'll find both fascinating and intriguing. But once again, you're in the driving seat this week.
I'm back again.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So before we dig into it, is there anything that you know about the Cecil Hotel?
Well, I know a little bit. Like, my understanding is... the Cecil Hotel inspired like the American Horror Story to a degree, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And it's of course a really famous hotel, which has also inspired other TV shows and other kind of things that are out there in the popular zeitgeist. But I also understand that it's in LA, is that right?
Yeah.
And it's just off the tip of what they call... Skid Row, is that right?
Yep.
Where it's a big like homeless slum.
That's right.
That exists in the city. So
there's about 10,000 people living on the streets. A third of them are in tents in Skid Row.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And we'll talk about Skid Row. We'll come on to that.
But that's all that I know.
That's all you know.
About the Cecil Hotel.
Okay. Well, you've got an idea that there is a checkered past, shall we say. Okay. So let's get into it. So in today's episode... we are covering the infamous Cecil Hotel, or Cecil if you like to call it that. It's known as one of the deadliest hotels in not just Los Angeles or America, but the world. It has a really dark and haunting history that includes a lot of crime, such as assaults, suicide, and murder. The hotel would frequently house drug addicts, prostitutes, gang members, and was even home to some of America's serial killers.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you mean home?
Well, we'll go into it, but the hotel was also a permanent residency as well.
Oh, really?
So people could stay there for months, years even.
Well, like a boarding house, we're talking.
A little bit. We'll explain why it offered that type of accommodation for the people in that area. But,
sure, fine.
Yeah. So some have suggested that the hotel is cursed and that there is this dark supernatural energy that somehow draws these people into a world of sin. Or even worse, these dark spirits that walk the halls of the hotel are so persuasive they can convince people to take their own life.
Oh, really? Ooh.
So this all resurfaced about 10 years ago. There's a lot more attention brought to the hotel when one of the most bizarre deaths occurred in 2013. A Canadian student named Elisa Lam was captured by CCTV behaving really strangely. And we'll look at that footage today. But this captured the attention and imagination of people worldwide trying to solve what happened to her, what was going on. And her death was really sad, and her body was found 3 weeks later.
Oh, shit.
And in these unusual circumstances that people just couldn't explain.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And her death then, I'm assuming, reignited all these past stories, or do you think that they kind of inspired or spurred on these stories to then kind of evolve out of the
think
hotel?
Because it was worldwide in terms of what happened to her, you know, it's international news. I think it just brought much more attention to the hotel, and it brought to light all these stories that had been reported probably in Los Angeles and stuff like that, and just how many deaths had occurred at this hotel and why.
Yeah.
And what was going on. Was there something more to it than just people coincidentally dying?
Yeah. So I'm excited for this because, like, why was she there? She was traveling, right?
She was traveling, yeah.
Why would you go to the Cecil Hotel, like on Skid Row?
Well, at the time, it had rebranded to a different hotel to kind of attract a younger crowd, I guess, and make more money, because the hotel was always designed to be this sort of traveller's hotel. But we'll dive into how it started and everything in just a second.
Okay, I just need to be patient.
You do just need to be patient. Just hold your horse. And as you rightly mentioned at the beginning of this, it did inspire one of the seasons of American Horror Story, Hotel.
Oh, Lady Gaga.
That's right. And if you remember watching that, there was these ghosts and vampires and other souls that were confined to this corrupt and torturous hotel.
Yeah, they were like kind of trapped, weren't they?
Exactly, yeah. So that's based on the events, I guess, of what's happened at the Cecil Hotel. Today, we're going to explore those 100 years and find out about some of the unfortunate people that visited the hotel, and where, in fact, there is actually a curse that exists on the hotel.
You keep me in suspense here. Let's do this.
All right. So we start our story in late 1924, where the hotel completes construction and opens. Its owner, William Banks Hanna, invests about $1 to $2 million, which was quite expensive for the time for a hotel. And that's the equivalent of around about 18 million in today's money. Wow. And it becomes one of the largest hotels on the West Coast in the 1920s. It stands 14 stories tall, and it's fitted out with 700 rooms. So a big hotel.
700 rooms is a lot.
What's interesting, and I think a lot of hotels do this, whilst there's 14 floors, the top floor is actually the 15th floor because they cut out the 13th floor for bad luck.
Oh, right. Yes. Like in China, they don't label their floor number 4 because the number 4 sounds a lot like death.
Yes.
So they just have like floor 1, 2, 3, skip 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah. And actually, I clocked on the Ryanair flight that we were on recently, row 13 didn't exist. It went 12 and 14.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah. I didn't notice that.
The hotel opened in the mid-20s. From the outside, the hotel doesn't really look anything special, in my opinion anyway. It's a pretty generic concrete building for that time. But on the inside, it was decked out pretty well. It had Art Deco features, stained glass windows, a marble staircase. It was all designed to attract this international businessman or kind of middle-class traveller. It's not like the most luxurious hotel, but it's a good hotel.
Sure. So I'm assuming you saw some pictures of the hotel when it was first built. Did it kind of give you the same vibes that they portrayed it in American Horror Story?
It takes so much inspiration in terms of the lobby and where all the keys are.
Oh, really?
And
so
everything
it's very similar, is it?
Very, very
wow,
similar.
Wow, okay. So in that case, if you have seen American Horror Story, then you do get a sense of that kind of upscaledness. It's not like luxury, but it's well kitted out, you know?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, if you ever, the Empire, is it the Empire State Building? No, the Chrysler Building. That was quite Art Deco on the first floor, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Interesting. Okay.
As I mentioned, it's intended for these international traveling businessmen and sort of middle class. And this was perfectly timed based on that period in time because, as you may know, the 20s were nicknamed the Roaring 20s in America. So I don't know if you know much about the Roaring 20s.
I don't know a huge deal, no.
It was roaring.
Yeah, thanks for that. I got that.
The reason they say that is with the end of the World War I in 1918, America was all about recovery and people were spending again. So there was an increase in construction, the oil industry grew, And there were these technological advancements which led to increased consumerism. People weren't just essentially buying necessities anymore. People could afford more luxury goods, you know, things like cars, radios, and other household appliances.
And hotels.
But that's my next point, actually, because people could travel more, not only in cars and on railways, but it was the decade that commercial flights came into force. And so your average Joe could now take a plane to go on holiday.
We knew that because of our Amelia Earhart episode.
That's right, yeah.
Wow.
And this was perfect for the owner of the hotel because he wanted to take advantage of these people that were visiting LA and traveling to the city for work or leisure.
Sure. And this is all because people were traveling internationally.
Yes, although it might have just been within America
or
at the
nationally,
time.
I guess
nationally,
so. Interesting.
The hotel had a very successful launch and it was doing well in its first couple of years. In June 1926, the hotel does experience its first death on its premises.
Okay.
A man named William McKay dies of natural causes, and a few months later, another man dies of heart disease. So it's nothing out of the ordinary. But
I mean, that's like 2 deaths in the span of what you're saying there,
a few
3 months?
Yeah, so it's a bit weird, but it's not rousing any suspicion at this stage. They're just natural deaths.
Not yet.
But this would be the beginning of what would become a series of dark events that would plague the hotel for almost 10 decades.
Nurse.
So to try and understand if there is something haunting the hotel, let's run through some more of the guests that never managed to check out.
Okay, God. God.
So supposedly the first suicide happened in 1927 by a guy called Percy Cook. He took his own life after a fallout with his wife. He tried to buy happiness and failed. So he left a suicide note to his wife, shot himself, leaving his wife and son behind.
Shit. So first of all, what does that mean he tried to buy happiness?
From what I could understand about, because there's not like loads of information, I think he had a decent amount of money and he tried to fill a void, but that didn't really work out. So in his suicide note, he's sort of saying like, I tried all these things. I'm still not happy.
Oh.
I think that's what I could interpret from the news story.
So he checked into the hotel on his own without his wife and then took his own life?
I believe so, yeah. Then 2 years later, in April of 1929, a 33-year-old Dorothy Robinson attempted to commit suicide in her room at the Cecil by overdosing on her antidepressants. Dorothy had been experiencing a psychotic breakdown after recently becoming widowed when her husband passed away a few months prior.
Oh, no.
But she did survive. She was rushed to hospital, and from what I understand, she made a recovery.
Okay, that's good.
The same, however, can't be said for a man who checked in as James Willis in 1931. A week later, he was found dead by taking poison. But what was really peculiar was that wasn't his actual name. He checked in under an alias.
I see. So they couldn't locate his family, I'm assuming?
Well, I think they eventually could work out who it was. But what I find quite strange is that this isn't the only instance of someone giving a fake name. And it becomes quite normal over the years, as some people would perhaps use the hotel as a rendezvous to have an affair, or perhaps arrange a night with a prostitute. And so they would give a false name. So I don't know if that was this guy's intention, or perhaps he just didn't want to be found or matched back and perhaps just wanted to go missing, if that makes sense. The following year, a member of staff found another man who had taken his own life, Benjamin Doddick, who shot himself in the head. And the year after that, a man died after being pinned against the wall by a truck at the rear entrance.
Jesus, so like the deaths are ramping up.
They are. And it doesn't stop there. A couple of years after, an army medical sergeant took his own life by slashing his own throat with a razor, which is a pretty gruesome and horrible way to go.
Was he committing suicide? I imagine him in the lobby doing that.
I think he did it in his own room, but he was struggling with poor health, and that's how he decided to end it.
Jesus.
3 years later, in 1937, a woman named Grace Magro sadly fell from her hotel room on the 9th floor whilst her boyfriend was asleep.
Ooh.
So he had no idea what had happened at the time, and no one knows if she fell, she jumped, or perhaps something possessed her to jump. I guess people think this is a bit odd. Why would someone go and do that?
Yeah.
She hadn't acted strangely before they checked into the hotel. And what's worse is she fell onto these telephone wires, which did help to break her fall. But then
they electrocuted her, I'm assuming.
I don't think they electrocuted her. I think they just broke her fall, but the injuries was just too bad that she died later in hospital.
Oh, what if she got chopped up like what you do with like an egg chopper.
Ooh.
And you put the egg, or a cheese cutter, cheese wire.
Maybe if it was a higher floor. I don't know.
God.
That's horrible to think about.
Yeah.
So the following year, another man jumped from the top floor and he was found dead on a neighbouring building.
Okay.
And in 1939, another man died through taking poison.
Okay.
So we haven't even got to the 1940s yet. And there's been 9 deaths.
Yeah, that seems a lot.
Or at least 9 deaths that have been reported and that we know about.
And so this opened up in what year? 1924. So it's averaging just slightly over 1 a year.
Roughly 1 every 2 years.
Yeah.
Averaging.
So it's averaging like 1 death every 2 years.
So at this point in time, this is when I think it gets its nickname, the suicide. Because I guess maybe there is some attention. And most of the deaths at this point have been people taking their own life. Maybe because it was one of the tallest buildings at the time, perhaps that was one of the reasons people went to jump.
But they weren't really jumping. Only one woman apparently jumped.
Yeah,
right?
most people are perhaps taking poison or they've shot themselves.
Slashed their necks with a razor.
So I think this is why people are starting to think, is there something suspicious going on? Why is this happening? Why are people being drawn to this place to end their lives?
Indian burial ground, Adam.
Well,
oh no.
Is it built on an Indian burial ground?
It never is.
We'll come back to that. The bad press, as I said, didn't really stop people from going to the hotel. It still remained pretty popular into the 1940s. But that doesn't mean that that decade started off any better, because a female teacher is found dead in 1940 in her room from taking poison.
Okay.
It seems like the way to go. Take some poison.
Yeah, I'm surprised that a man had taken poison. Normally it's the women that take poison. No, actually, take that back. It's normally the women that administer poison, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, women give the poison. They don't murder, they don't slash, they don't stab, they don't shoot. They give you poison.
Oh, sneaky.
Yeah, it injects a bit of insulin in your mashed potatoes. Ooh, this mashed potato is a bit sweet. Then you're dead.
Unless it is actually sweet potato.
This is true.
Okay. So next up in 1944, in what was probably one of the most horrific events that I found out about, a young lady, she was 19 at the time, her name was Dorothy, and her boyfriend, who was 38, so a bit of an age gap, but they were staying at the hotel, and they were in bed one night asleep when Dorothy awakes with serious abdominal pain. She goes to the bathroom where she single-handedly delivers a baby.
Oh, wow.
Her baby, I should say, at this point.
Yeah.
But her boyfriend had no clue about that. And I don't think she knew that she was pregnant.
Oh, no. She didn't dump the baby, did she?
Well, she delivers the baby and she does all this without waking her boyfriend. So he must have been out cold or whatever. But she thinks the baby's stillborn. And so I guess some sort of fear of telling her boyfriend what's happened, him leaving her or whatever.
Because the baby's stillborn.
Or that she's pregnant, full stop.
Right, and he didn't expect it.
Yeah, she makes the awful decision and throws the baby out of the window and heads back to bed.
Jesus, how do you do that and then just head back to bed? She clearly didn't sleep that night.
I don't know.
If she did sleep, then that's an issue.
Well, you would think that there would be a lot of blood and other things going on in that bathroom. There's a whole cleanup job you need to do there. But
yeah.
The body of the baby is found on a nearby building.
Oh.
And when they did a post-mortem, there was evidence that the baby had air in its lungs.
Oh, so it wasn't stillborn. That's sad.
That's really sad. She did go to trial, but was found not guilty of murder due to insanity. So perhaps, I don't know, something not quite right there.
Well, the thing is, though, like you plead insanity as a defense, in my opinion. So I think that was what her lawyers instructed her to do, knowing that she probably premeditated it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't buy that she didn't know that she was pregnant.
Well, it happened. It happened to Sonia on EastEnders.
Yeah, but that is a fictional, like, soap opera.
I think it's based on, like, true things happening, as rare as it is.
Sure. I mean, there was that recent woman from New Mexico who the police just show up at the house and they're like, is your daughter here? And the mum's like, why do you want to see my daughter? And they're like, we've had, like, there's a police investigation. We can't tell you that. Turns out that her daughter went to the hospital. She gave birth. She didn't know that she was pregnant. She ran to the toilet, gave birth in the toilet of the hospital, and dumped the baby in the trash.
So kind of similar situation in a way. Wow.
Yeah.
guess
again, I think that she was pregnant.
I don't know, maybe there's this feeling of shame. I don't know, you're surprised. I don't know, I can't put myself in that sort of situation.
But what happens after 9 months if you've not had a period, right? And you go, well, I mean, that's normally the first telltale sign. I know, yes, fair enough, some women don't have regular periods. But if you have regular periods and you've stopped having your period, then surely that should be an alarm bell. And that was the case with this young girl from New Mexico.
Oh, okay. I
so
guess
therefore she knew.
I don't know. There might be some anomalies. I don't really know.
Okay, yeah. We deviate.
We deviate. But you're right to sort of say, was she actually insane? Because I don't think she had any signs of insanity beforehand. So why did she do it? Did the hotel drive her to do that? I don't know. In 1947, a 35-year-old man, Robert, he decides to take his own life by jumping from the 7th floor.
God.
In 1954, another instance of someone checking in under a false identity. She was a 55-year-old woman this time, and she also jumps from the 7th floor. But then on the 8th floor, people would commit suicide as well. There's another lady here that I've got, Julia Moore. She decides to end her life from jumping from the window. Then on the 9th floor, you've got another lady, Pauline. She had been fighting with her husband in 1962. They had attempted a reconciliation at the hotel, but that didn't apparently work out. And so to teach him a lesson, she jumps out the window.
Jesus, that's a hard lesson to learn, man.
That really is. But what's worse, she happened to jump at the same time a man named George Gianni was passing by underneath. And so she lands on this poor man. And so she not only kills herself, she kills this man as well.
Oh, really?
Police actually thought it was a joint suicide at the time because how they
were lovers
or something like that, or got in a fight. But they knew that he didn't jump because he had his shoes still on.
Right.
So I'm guessing that's a telltale sign.
Well, because you're not allowed your shoes
I'm
on in the hotel room, or they fly off when you're falling out the window.
I think that's the point, of they fly off if you jump, potentially, or the impact. I don't know.
Oh, God.
So yeah, that's really sad. Another man leaps to his death in 1963. Then in 1964, we have our first murder.
Okay.
So Goldie Osgood, she was known as Pigeon Goldie, as she would feed the local pigeons, a bit like that lady from
Home Alone.
Yeah, like that. That's what I imagine. So she was quite well known in the local area, a little local celebrity. And she lived in the hotel. As I mentioned, you could take up permanent lodgings there as well as just for a few nights. So she was found to have been stabbed, strangled, and raped in her room.
Jeez.
And they did arrest a guy, but then I think he got acquitted, and so they never actually found her killer. In 1975, another woman checks into the hotel under Alison Lowell, but this is not her real identity. She's only 23 when she ends her life. In 1992, there's another man that doesn't have an identity, but he also commits suicide, but people can't rule out the fact that he might have been pushed this time round. In 2001, there's an overdose and a murder. A man is strangled in 2003. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I'm getting the sense that there's a lot of suicides.
Yeah. Now, you might remember we talked about Elisa Lam at the very beginning, and there was a Netflix documentary series that was released a few years ago, I think it was now. And that was all about the peculiar mystery about Elisa's death. And I thought it'd be interesting just to talk about the hotel manager, which was interviewed in that documentary series.
Yeah, that was a woman, wasn't it?
Yeah, she was a blonde woman, and she'd worked there from 2007 to 2017.
Okay, so 10 years.
10 years. And she said that there were at least 80 deaths while she worked there.
Jeez, just while she was there. But at what portion, right? Because remember you said that there's two parts, right? There is the residential side and then there's the tourist side.
True, but I think it's just the whole building. There's been that many. And that's like the equivalent of like 8 deaths a year. And these aren't really reported. You can't really find instances, so you don't know exactly what happened to these people. But
or is it even true?
Maybe.
Are they capitalizing on the myth of the hotel?
Maybe, or maybe there's some news stories that are just buried, or maybe the type of clientele that's at the hotel at this point in time.
Okay.
There could be just a lot of overdoses, unfortunately. She also mentioned that there would be calls to the police at least 2 to 3 times a day.
Wow.
So this really builds a picture of what this place was like at the time and the type of clientele that would be staying there and all the trouble it would have, even in this very short window of time. We've had this many instances of death.
Mm-hmm.
By the 70s and 80s, a lot of criminals would actually frequent and stay there. And the rule was, I think, that you didn't go past the 6th floor because that's where people died.
Sure. And I also imagine, like, this is probably where it's going to ramp up even more with the crime side of things and the drugs, because across America during the 70s, it was notorious for huge crime levels rising across all of America and all the urban built-up areas.
Yeah.
So, for example, New York City, during the 70s, it was considered like the dystopian kind of city of the world.
Yeah, I remember growing up thinking or hearing that New York was pretty dangerous.
Yeah, like murders everywhere, people being robbed and stuff. And that didn't really calm down to the 90s, but it really ramped up in the 70s, right? And LA and Chicago and those cities would have also started to get those really bad reputations at these points as well.
Exactly, yeah. Well, it was also during this period that one of the first serial killers stayed there. The guy called the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. So do you know much about Richard Ramirez?
I want to say, was he like a Latino kind of guy? I mean, clearly by the name. But he would stalk the victims initially. That's hence the name, the Night Stalker. But he didn't really discriminate. He would, or was he attracted to old ladies?
I think he didn't have a type, from what I understand.
He didn't have a type, yeah.
Because I think there were people of all ages, men and women. But he did target some women, and I think he would, sexually attack them, I think, in some instances.
Am I right in thinking also he kind of like operated around Griffin Park, which is the main big park up there?
In Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles, yeah.
Well, yeah, he stayed at the hotel, I think, between 1984 and 1985. I mean, he didn't necessarily start out a murderer, but I think when you learn about his history, so he had a couple of major blows to his head as a kid before he was like 8, and his dad, I think he was an alcoholic, so perhaps suffered some abuse there. He had epilepsy as well. Sorry, that's what I meant to say, from the blows to the head. So I think he didn't have a good start in life. He started drinking and smoking weed. But what's interesting, I say interesting in a strange way, but it sounds like he was influenced by his older cousin who went to Vietnam.
Right.
And he would come back from Vietnam with these stories of murder and rape and pictures and things like that. And that's what sparked his first sort of curiosity with death and things like that.
So what's his connection with the Cecil Hotel then?
Well, he travelled around, but he lived there for a couple of years. And I think it was just a perfect spot, given that the place was kind of run down at this point and a lot of crime was going on. Like you mentioned, in the 80s, it's almost like an area you can probably blend in a little bit.
Yeah, you can disappear a little bit,
The parks you mentioned, he would, I think, prey on his victims and stalk them. He would break into their houses at night through unlocked doors. Actually, yeah, so he wouldn't even be breaking in. He's just letting himself in.
Yeah, because at the time, people felt it was quite common for people to just leave their doors open at that time.
Yeah, so I think people like him is now why we lock our doors.
Yeah, I think that's what they said in the documentary, wasn't it?
Yeah. He was quite creepy. I mean, he would sketch a pentagram on certain bodies as well.
Oh, so here's our Satanism link.
Yeah, so he was definitely connected and interested in that. Because obviously we talked about that was it the last episode? I think we talked about that.
Well, wherever the episode lands, it was the episode with the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. But yeah, this was all kind of remnant from the 1960s and fed into the 70s, which then fed into the 80s.
Yeah.
Where people were really intrigued by Satanism and all these different cults were starting to rise. So people had a real morbid fascination, and if you did anything around Satanism, it was guaranteed to capture headlines.
Yeah, I think there's even like pictures of him in court with like the pentagram on his actual hand or something like that. I'm sure there is.
Crazy.
So yeah, it really horrible. He would nearly decapitate some of his victims, remove the eyes from one of them. He was a horrible,
so he
horrible
mutilated these bodies.
Yeah.
Hard.
What was also strange, so once he is spotted dumping his bloodied clothes after a murder in a dumpster outside the hotel, and he walks through the lobby naked.
Oh, wow. That's hot.
Okay. But the weird thing, I think, is that I think he missed here is that's really weird, but no one reports that because this is just daily life at the Cecil Hotel.
Oh, really? It's just mental.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, just a naked man walking, and you might have just thought that, oh, he's
Covered in blood?
Oh,
Well,
I don't know. I don't know what it looks like.
So yeah, it didn't arouse any kind of suspicion, and he wasn't the first serial killer that lived there.
Who else?
No, he didn't necessarily live there, but he stayed there for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
John Unterweger.
Oh, never heard of him.
So he was a convicted murderer in Austria in 1974, and he went to prison for strangling a woman with her bra.
Okay.
He served time in prison.
I mean, these women walk around with a ready-to-go weapon. What do you expect? No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Oh yeah, we're going to get complaints. He served time in prison, and he managed to fool everyone by saying that he was a changed person and he had rehabilitated.
Uh-huh.
So much so that he was released in 1990, and he became a playwright and a journalist.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So he actually was rehabilitated.
Well,
He didn't go on to kill more.
hold that thought.
Okay.
He hosted TV shows about criminal rehabilitation. Now, can you imagine a murderer now almost becoming like a mini celebrity in that sense? Like, let's give him a TV show. Let's give him I don't know.
What if he's paid his dues? Then why not? Like if you...
A murderer, though?
I don't know.
I mean, and this was only 30 years ago, but this just seems really alien to me that they would ever even consider this. But maybe that's what they do in Austria, or did at the time. In 1991, though, he's hired to write about crime and prostitution in LA. So he takes a trip over there, and he conveniently decides to stay at the Cecil Hotel. And it was at this time that 3 sex workers go missing and, well, they're found dead, essentially. And all of them, I think, had been strangled with their own bra.
Their own bra. God, you think you would have learnt, right?
2 serial killers. And it makes me wonder, as we said, is this like a hotel that they sought out because they could hide in the shadows to commit these crimes? And it feels very much like Sin City, like the movie.
Yes. Yeah, it does.
In fact, you know, there's organized crime, there's drugs, there's prostitution.
Do you think that there's a solid connection? Do you think that's what inspired Sin City?
Well, I think there's a few Sin Cities in the world, but I think Los Angeles at the time was one of the big ones because of some of the things that were going on that we'll go into. So yeah, I think that probably inspired Frank Miller, the comic writer. And so at this point, we're going to move on to Elisa Lam.
Let's do it.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, she was a 21-year-old Canadian student who's traveling at the time by herself. And she mysteriously vanishes at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles in January 2013. She would become one of its most famous victims as a result. So bearing in mind this hotel's reputation, I think you mentioned earlier, why would she even stay there? And so it had rebranded to the Stay on Main, or I should say, what they did is they divided up the hotel into separate sections. The Stay on Main, which would accommodate younger travelers and a bit more of a hostel, but nicer, I guess, if you know what I mean, for the first few floors. You also had some residents that would stay there. And on the very top floors would be the Cecil Hotel residents.
Right, okay. So what's the inspiration behind the wording or the rebranding of Stay on Main?
Well, they couldn't basically kick the old tenants out because they had to, as part of the LA law, they had to provide so much accommodation for low-income residents.
Yeah, makes sense.
But they needed to make money. And so what they did is they divided, I think, the lobbies up into 2. So you had a separate lobby for Stay on Main and a separate lobby for the Cecil and the residents.
So they're keeping the riffraff away from the tourists, and they don't even share the same entrance.
They don't share the same entrance, but they do share the same lift.
Okay, God.
So imagine you're staying at the Stay on Main and you're thinking, oh, this is not too bad.
This is nice, but the lifts stink of piss.
They did.
Did they?
Yeah, they're like, I can't remember what one of the policemen says, but yeah, he does comment on that. And so you could get in a lift with someone who's basically high on drugs and you're like, ooh, that's just weird. Interestingly as well, if you go on Google and look at some of the reviews for the Cecil Hotel and the Stay on Main, there's some funny people that have retrospectively put a review in for 10 years ago saying, I stayed there, it was awful.
Should we read a couple?
See if you can get a couple.
Yeah. So, Cecil Hotel, Stay on Main. Stay on Main. Hotel. So, Rosie Batty, or Batty. Oh, God. Woke up to a man staring at me. He was right in my face, but he said he worked there and was making sure I was okay.
That's really considerate.
It is. So I'm pretty sure it was just routine. I felt pretty comfortable for the most part, apart from when he smelt my hair. Depends what your boundaries are. Would recommend beds are a bit springy though.
Bit springy.
13 people marked that one useful.
From what I could see, it was a mixture of 1-star and then 5-star reviews, which makes me feel like it was people kind of like, we need to get our average up.
Ooh, here's a good one.
Okay.
So 1-star review from Noah Durante. I forgot to write a review, but the rooms are dirty and I hear people fighting and screaming all the time. The water tastes funny and the cop keeps coming into the hotel and I see a dude with red food coloring. Overall, a bad hotel. Oh, I don't know what that means.
I don't know. It's very weird. So I think there's generally some awful reviews, but I do think some people have jumped on the bandwagon a little bit and sort of trying to play up its history.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, interesting.
Interesting, yeah. So, back to Elisa. So she's been staying at the hotel for a little while. She would check in with her family back home in Canada pretty frequently, probably most days. And when her family don't hear from her, they report Elisa as missing as they can't get hold of her. The police start their investigation and the hotel hands over all their CCTV footage.
Like, I'm surprised they took it that seriously straight away. Do you know what I mean? Like, they start their investigation, they contacted the hotel, they asked for all the CCTV footage.
Well, I don't know how quickly it's turned over, but she's reported missing. She's staying at the hotel. Let's see what her movements were. Did she leave the hotel? What's going on? So they turn over all the footage and the police start looking through it all. And what they see is that she had gone out one morning and she came back. But what they don't find is her leaving the hotel again. So they only have footage of her entering the hotel.
Entering in, okay, but so nothing ever going out.
Nothing capturing her on any of the exits leaving the building.
So she's got to still be in the hotel.
It's got to still be in the hotel, is what they're thinking. They then look into the CCTV in the lift. Now, this footage is what's actually released to the public to try and help the police find Elisa, because this is the last bit of footage of her alive.
Shit.
And this footage went global in terms it was on the news. It was kind of everywhere at the time, and it reignited these theories that the Cecil curse had struck again and that something sinister is haunting that hotel.
Right.
So I think we should watch the video and then you describe what you see.
Okay. So it's a silent video clip. It's about 3 minutes. It's CCTV footage of inside an elevator. The elevator door is just opened. A young woman's just gotten in. Ooh, she seems very dramatic. She's bent over. She's looking at the numbers. She's taken her time. She's pressed the button. Now she's standing in the corner of the elevator. She's just standing there. Oh. So she's paused. The elevator hasn't closed, but she's looked out really quickly.
Well,
as
outside
if she's
the doors.
Outside the doors, like look left and right, but like in a crouched motion.
Okay.
And then she stepped back in and now she's standing by the inside of the elevator.
Almost like she's hiding?
Oh, now she's hiding and she's cowering. Someone's out there, clearly. She's taking another peek. She's looking out. I don't think she sees anyone. Okay, she's taking a step further. Oh, she's just done a little skip and a jump. And she's just now doing some fancy footwork. So I get it. There's this mix of, is someone after her? But then some of her movements seem quite animated in like a steppy, dancey way.
I think she's quite erratic.
Yeah.
I think with some of the hand gestures. She'd gone in and she'd pressed a load of the buttons on the lift. Like she'd pressed them all, basically.
But bizarrely, the lift hasn't even closed.
Nope, the doors are still open.
So she's now back in the elevator. She's now pressing all the buttons, because before I think she just pressed the one button. Now she's pressing them all. The elevator's not closing. Weird. Is it malfunctioning?
Or is someone actually holding it?
But
open?
She would interact with someone just on the outside the door if they were, right?
Right, but then I think what you're about to see...
Oh. She's talking to... Oh, those hands. Okay, she could be talking to someone very animatedly.
Where is she talking to them?
She's looking...
So she's outside the lift.
Yeah.
It's kind of obscured from view. I think you can see, it looks like she's talking to someone, gesturing, like giving directions. I don't know. So there's something going on. Almost she's having a conversation.
But also the hand gestures are too dramatic for me to think that was a natural conversation. But she could be talking to someone if that's how she talks to me. The lift's closing.
So she's gone out of the lift.
Off. Yeah, she left. And then the lift closed.
Conveniently, it closes when she's left.
That's weird.
It's very weird. So...
Oh, the lift is opening now. What's happening now?
It's just replaying.
Oh, must have just... Oh, no. It's 3-minute mark. It's probably gone to the next floor. Now it's closing again. And now it's going up. And then it opens, yes, on a different floor. This time it's a red floor. Shit. So what happened?
It's a very... weird video. I think everyone can agree when they watch that. To just recap some of the points, she's seen there pressing a load of buttons, like as if she wants to go to every floor. She's definitely seems like she's hiding at some point, or at least trying to like stay out of the way. But then almost the way that she peers out of the elevator suggests that she's being followed, or she's kind of looking behind her. But then she looks like she might be gesturing to someone when she's outside the elevator, communicating with either a person or something. And then the doors don't shut, and then they only shut when she's left. And then we didn't pick up on it, but that timestamp.
Okay.
It's not legible. You know there should be numbers there
at
a time, but it's just a blur.
Why though?
Well, this whole footage sparks so much curiosity, and like online communities, Reddit sleuths and all that sort of stuff are just like, what is going on in the
Sure. City? But why would you have CCTV footage with deliberately timestamps that you can't even read or see?
Well, this is what people think. Has something been doctored here or edited to kind of, I don't know, hide something?
Yeah.
Don't know what, but hide something.
So what are the theories?
Okay. So this odd behavior by Elisa made people think, was she being chased by a killer? Was there a foul play? Because is there some kind of cover up with the weird timestamp? Or is there something in the hotel that is making her act this way, i.e. the curse has come back? And from looking at this footage, you can totally see why people are suspecting this, because bad things keep happening to this hotel over and over again. And it's, it's a safe place for criminals to hide. Is there something darker going on? So the police spend several weeks looking for her, and it's 19 days after her disappearance that her body is discovered by one of the janitors. She is found floating in one of the hotel's water tankers, which sits up on the rooftop.
Oh, God.
She is in there. She's completely naked, and it's only when guests of the hotel complain about an odd colour and taste of the water.
Hence one of the reviews we just read.
Well, I don't know if that's true. I think it's probably based on this. But the guests are complaining about the water, and it's from that people decide, let's go check inside these tankers. Maybe there's a dead bird.
Oh, so that spurs them on to check. Okay.
Yeah, and that's
so she's naked. Where is her clothes? How did she get in there?
Her clothes are in there, but she is naked. They're just not on her. They're floating around in the tank.
Did she take them off while she was in the tank?
Well, we're going to discuss a little bit more about that. So the media reports that she is found sealed within the tank. The hatch is on, and this creates even more questions, because how did she die? How did she get in that tank in the first step? Did someone put her in there? Because this tank is 8 to 10 feet tall, and so it's not easy to kind of climb up. And once you're in the tank, you can't get out very easily, because imagine the water being inside the tank. There's nothing to grab onto. It's like a cylinder type tank, essentially, and you've got to try and lift yourself up or close the hatch, essentially. Has she done that? It's pretty impossible, essentially, is what people think.
Well, it depends how heavy this hatch is, right? And how do you put the hatch into place, get in? How big is the hatch entrance?
True, and then how high is the water? Because the water rises up and down depending on how much is being used and things like that. And so if she's further down in the water, you can't scramble up. There's no ladders and things to kind of climb up from the inside.
God, do you think that she got into the tank when the water level was low and therefore she couldn't get herself out? But she managed to get the hatch on because you said it was sealed?
It was sealed, yeah.
Maybe she had put herself in there. The water level was really low. She couldn't get herself out. She ended up dying. Someone was walking around. They noticed that the hatch was off. They went up and just tightened it.
Well, that is one possibility. But why she got in there in the first place, there's lots of questions here. We're going to try and unravel some of them.
Okay.
So the autopsy is carried out. And even after this, it's not 100% clear what has happened. What is ruled out is that she was unlikely murdered or was caused any harm by anyone because there's no trauma found on her body to suggest that she was killed beforehand and then placed in the tank. Plus, these tanks aren't easy to climb. So to put someone in this tank, you have to climb on these sort of pipes. So that's not very easy to do. You've got to squeeze in between other tanks as well because this one was at the back. And so for someone to do that without causing any trauma or harm to a body is pretty much impossible.
But it also seems bizarre that she would go for the one at the back. This is so weird.
It is weird. It is. So the police think that she's gotten in there herself, but why would she do that in the first place? Unless maybe someone's persuaded her to get in there. I mean, if we look at the CCTV, it does look like she might be hallucinating, or maybe she's on some kind of drugs and perhaps she's not being chased for someone. Online Reddit YouTubers or whatever, they're convinced that she's being chased or someone is stopping that lift from moving because the door just doesn't stay open. It should shut. Everyone's been in an elevator. They know it shuts after a period of time, like 30 seconds. So the internet get hold of her autopsy report. I don't know how, but they do. And they start to pick holes in it because at first it says her cause of death was undetermined. And it looks like it's dated on the 15th of this month that it comes out.
Yeah.
But then someone crosses that out and changes it to accident. And the date on that looks like it's the 18th. So it's 3 days later that someone had marked it undetermined. And that's really weird because they're like, well, why would someone go back?
Could it be that these autopsies get peer reviewed by like someone does the autopsy, then you hand it over to a superior and then they have a little look and they go, well, actually, based on X, Y, and Z and this and that, or new evidence that comes along within those 3 days, they just go, well, it's only a small change, just cross this bit out and change it.
Possibly, but I think because of the weird timestamp and the way that she's got in the tank, the whole situation is just weird. And that's why people think, oh, is there a cover-up? Is there someone in the police force that did that and they're protecting one of their own? So for us to really find out, we need to look at the facts.
The facts.
The facts. Let's start with those elevator doors. Why didn't they close?
Yeah.
Well, Elisa is seen pressing several buttons. I think she presses pretty much all of them. At the very bottom of that row of buttons is the hold door button.
Okay.
That keeps the elevator's doors open for 2 minutes.
Oh, really? Until you then override it by pressing the closed door button?
No, it doesn't. It just stays open. So you can press all the buttons and it stays open. Or that lift, that's how it works, essentially.
I see.
There may be a way to override it, but she didn't press that button to override it.
Nothing to see here, guys.
When people find that out, they're like, okay, unlikely she was being held in that lift by someone or something. So that's ruled out. Now let's look at the timestamp. So has someone edited it and blurred it out and cut parts out of that video footage? For someone to do that, that suggests a cover-up and the police are perhaps hiding something, or maybe there's a killer within the police force. What's also odd is that the police do a massive search of that hotel and that does include the roof and nothing is initially found. No one even, goes
they
near
didn't
the
look
tank.
in the tank.
They didn't go in the tank, no.
Sure.
But there's no real answer to the timestamp issue, which is slightly annoying. What people do say is that the hotel handed over that footage to the police and the police have said there's nothing suspect about the footage. The only thing that people may say is that because that footage got pushed out by media outlets all over the place, that maybe something has been edited by press or someone out there and that's what's been replicated to make it look a bit weird or whatever.
But the original footage, they don't find anything suspicious.
Don't find anything suspicious.
So are you saying that on the timestamps on the original video, they're not obscured or?
They don't actually say that. They just say that there's nothing suspicious about the footage.
Yeah, they're just not alarmed by it.
Yeah.
I see.
So the next theory is perhaps she's on some form of drugs. Well, toxicology reports suggest that there's no alcohol or illicit drugs that are found in her system. The only drugs that are found in her system are ones that are... What?
Lithium.
Lithium?
Yeah, because she's antidepressant. I don't know, like an antidepressant. I don't know.
Well, she is on prescribed drugs because she suffers from bipolar.
Okay.
But what's really weird about this is that the strength that they would expect to find in her system is way lower than someone that is taking this medication.
Way lower. So what does that mean? That means she is not taking her medication?
Well, this is the thing. That video footage, when you look at it again under this understanding, experts are suggesting that her behavior was consistent with someone experiencing a manic episode.
Okay, it makes sense.
So the autopsy revealed that the concentration of her medication in her body was really weak. And so that suggests that she perhaps stopped taking her medication.
Right.
And that's something that's actually backed up by her family, because this isn't the first time that she's stopped taking her meds.
Mm-hmm.
And she became delusional before. She was seeing things that weren't there, like imagining she's being chased and she was hiding under a bed. So with this in mind and the severity of her diagnosis, you can perhaps have these weird kind of, unorganized thoughts where logic and reality don't quite make sense.
Yeah, sure.
And so perhaps she was running away from something in her mind.
And it's really common for people who do suffer from all sorts of mental health conditions that are on medication. They're taking the medication, they all of a sudden go, do you know, I'm feeling really great. I don't think I need it anymore.
Yeah.
But they don't realize always that, well, you're feeling great because you're taking your meds,
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So they try to wean themselves off, or they think, oh, it's going to be different this time. And they do, and yeah, unfortunately.
Then they spiral down again and have to then rebuild.
That's it,
up
yeah.
Again.
I feel like that's really common.
Well, what's also interesting is because of this type of hotel it was, she shared a room with some other girls and they complained about her odd behavior. She apparently left notes to other guests on their beds to tell them to go away, go home, and she wouldn't let people in her room.
Wow.
So she was a bit disruptive.
Yeah.
So eventually, because of her behavior, the hotel guests, they didn't call the police or do anything like that. They just decided to move her to a dedicated room by herself so she didn't disturb other guests. Mm-hmm. This information is all kind of drip fed and eventually comes out. So 4 months later, after her death, the police think they finally cracked the case and the cause of her death.
Go.
It was accidental drowning with her bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
That was the contributing factor.
Yeah. That makes all perfect sense to me.
So if we go with this reasoning, we can assume the following.
Yeah.
Elisa hadn't been taking her medication.
Uh-huh.
She'd been acting strangely to other guests.
Mm-hmm.
She's seen in the elevator and it looks like she's having one of these episodes, hallucinating, paranoia, and she's trying to run away from someone. And we know the family have confirmed that's happened before. And so she's running through the hotel. She's generally feeling scared for her life. And she thinks that going to the roof is a good way to escape whatever is chasing her.
Mm-hmm.
She sees the water tanks and perhaps she thinks that's a good place to hide. She climbs the ladder, she opens the hatch and she jumps in.
Okay.
Now, if the tank was filled with water, then you could potentially pull yourself out. However, if the water was being used, as I mentioned, then it's going to decrease and then it's hard to get back out. So that's one of the reasons she drowned, because she's treading water for so long. Perhaps she undresses herself to try and stay afloat. Or the other...
What about hypothermia?
That's exactly the other alternative,
right?
Because that affects your nerve endings, I believe.
Yeah, I think if you start to get really cold, then you start to actually feel very hot and you want to take your clothes off. That's what happened with the guys on the Dyatlov Pass incident.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So because it's up on the roof, it's 14 stories, it's January, it could get very cold.
Yeah.
That's possibly what happened. And so that's the reason she was found naked.
God.
But what about that closed hatch to the water tank? How could that have happened? And what's with the dodgy autopsy report, which looked like it had been edited?
Sure.
So not everything adds up yet, and people are still really dubious about the explanation and the cause of death.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sorry to say, there is no scandal.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think that possibly the reason why the hatch is shut, because I don't think if the water level was low and she couldn't get up, that's the only logical reason why she wasn't able to get out, because the water level was too low. Days have gone by. 19 days went by. Someone has obviously been doing maintenance. They come out, they see the lid is off the tank. They're not going to look in the tank. No one expects a body to be in that tank. Just like with Amanda Knox. She came home, the door was open. she didn't think that someone would be dead in the house, right? You're not looking for that. They just see, oh, someone's forgot to put this lid on. They lock it down, they tighten it, and that's it. She's now entombed in here until they discover her body 19 days later.
Well, that's a logical theory, but you're wrong.
Okay.
First, we'll talk about the autopsy report. This was actually just a misread from someone not properly writing an 8. So if you think about it, the first date, it said it looked like it was the 15th, and then the second date was the 18th. But if you draw a 5 and you don't properly loop up that bottom bit to the end, then that's why someone thought it was 2 different dates, but it was both the same date. They corrected it on the same day.
Okay.
So nothing really suspicious
Nothing
there.
going on here, boys.
But for the hatch, this was the biggest conundrum that people just could not get their heads around. Why was it shut? Surely that must have assumed that someone else was involved in order to be able to close that hatch. Well, it was the media that reported the hatch was found shut.
Oh, it wasn't found shut then in real life.
In the report by the police, the janitor had said that he found Elisa and the hatch was open. So that failed to get reported correctly by the media, and it just went with it and rolled and rolled.
Sure. Like, I understand the motivation, right? People who are reporting on this are going to be like, oh, murder at the Cecil Hotel. Oh, someone's committed suicide. Oh, they've opened up the hatch and there they are. But like, how can we make this more mysterious? The hatch was shut.
Yeah.
Tight.
So that's what fueled the mystery, and that's what kind of brought this big hype to it because of all these different elements. But when you kind of pinpoint them down, they all can be solved with logic and reasoning.
Yeah.
So for poor Elisa, it was a tragic accident. It wasn't suicide. It wasn't murder. She wasn't cursed by ghosts that rule the hotel. And actually, despite her death, there was still a lot of people interested in going to the hotel, particularly because of her death, actually.
Yeah.
And so that caused some concerns that there might be copycat situations that would happen as a result. And so the hotel finally closed its doors in 2017.
What? It's actually closed?
It did close.
Okay.
So whilst it was closed, people still suspected the place is haunted because there's footage of lights turning on throughout the building, even security guards, because it still needed security to sort of ward off trespassers. They say that they would hear noises in the night and things like that. So it still had a very creepy aura about it. But if Elisa wasn't cursed, well, were the rest of the victims that we went through cursed? Is there still something to this?
Well, I have a theory on that.
Okay.
So you have this idea of like, let's say San Francisco Bay Bridge, right? The Golden Gate Bridge, where people commit suicide on that. And then over time, that becomes known as the place that you go if you want to commit suicide. And I think maybe that could have something to do with it. Its reputation then precedes itself as the place that you go if you want to commit suicide. Because a lot of the deaths that happen there are suicides. Yes, there's some murders, but maybe if you account for the suicides, correct for that, the number of murders that happen is maybe within an acceptable level.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the acceptable level or acceptance level, I'm not quite sure what the right terminology is there.
1 every 5 years.
Yeah, what, like if you go to a travel lodge in London, how many suicides has that had? Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like,
Actually, no. Suicides versus murders. Suicides, I would say maybe 1 a year. But if you have, let's say, a murder, then like 1 a decade.
Well, let's try and find out what happened to this place. Why was it chosen as a suicide place, even if it wasn't haunted and everything like that? Was it built on some weird ancient burial Indian ground or something? Or did it really just attract criminals through some sort of paranormal way, this darkness drawing them in and tempting people to commit suicide? So, to find out the real reason, we have to go back to the decade it was built, the 1920s. And whilst that decade started off really well, by the time you reach 1929, it's a completely different America.
Okay.
So, a very quick American history lesson. Number 1, it was also the decade of Prohibition in America.
Ooh, no alcohol.
Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar with that period, it was between 1920 and 1933, where the production, sale, and transportation of alcohol drinks were banned in America.
God, so people are like, what? I can't have anything to drink?
Yeah.
I'm going to kill myself.
Well, the whole point of the ban was to reduce social issues associated with alcohol abuse, such as crime, poverty, and family problems.
And did it work?
Well, it kind of created more problems.
Well, for the Cecil Hotel.
So that essentially created speakeasies, which were illegal bars and clubs that would sell alcohol.
Oh, really?
And while it wasn't limited to LA, a lot of these speakeasies were downtown near the Toy District, Skid Row, and the Cecil Hotel. And around these bars, there would be organized crime, LA gangsters and bootleggers that'd be taking advantage of, selling this unlicensed alcohol. And that obviously created a really sort of rough area. Number two, throughout the last few decades, many Americans migrated westward in search of opportunities following the gold rush. And so they wanted to improve their wealth, and going to California and LA was perhaps the way to do that. The construction of the railroad network played a crucial role in helping those people migrate. And that railroad extended all the way to Los Angeles, specifically the area known as Skid Row. This would bring in immigrant laborers, and the area began to rapidly grow. But a lot of the work in LA was agricultural, and so it was seasonal. And so to cater to the workers between the jobs, many bars and flop houses, or doss house in the UK.
Okay, interesting.
Were these low-cost, basic lodgings. They're the ones that sort of sprang up around this area. And that was to, I guess, keep people entertained whilst they were out of work. And to get a place, eventually you didn't need a background check. You didn't need to put any deposits down. It was very easy. So if you were an ex-criminal, or you perhaps had been released from a mental institution, it was quite easy to get accommodation there.
Actually, one interesting thing as well that I found out when I was listening to this podcast on the 1970s in America is that new regulations came in the 70s. So what would constitute whether or not you received help resulted in loads of kind of asylums and hospitals turning people away from hospitals that had mental health issues. So you just have an influx of these people living on the streets with mental health issues. All of a sudden, they're just now homeless because they can't provide for themselves.
That's awful.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why homelessness in New York was just through the roof, because I think it turned out like 80% of the homeless people had mental health issues of some degree. I don't know if that figure is correct, but quite a large number of the homeless people.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same for Skid Row in LA, which we'll touch on at the very end. But yeah, a very similar sort of instance. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, there was a big change in consumerism and opportunity for Americans at this time. There was a huge stock market boom. Many people invested in stocks, often leveraging their own assets.
Okay.
So people had the opportunity to buy on credit as well at that point in time. So that helped with the economy and everything like that. But the last thing to happen in that decade was the start of the Great Depression. And so for those that are not too clued up on what that is, it was a huge economic crisis that hit the United States in the 1930s, very similar to the credit crunch of 2008. But it began with the stock market crash in 1929. And so those that had invested and leveraged their assets lost out big time. That caused a chain reaction of financial collapse and widespread unemployment. And the impact was pretty devastating. People lost their homes, banks went under, businesses failed. And so, that wasn't just Los Angeles, it was the rest of the country, but Los Angeles in particular heavily relied on agriculture and oil and real estate. And so the demand for goods and services really dropped in that particular area. And so that exacerbated this problem that was in downtown LA. So in summary, you have all these people that have just moved to LA to find work. They're now jobless, they're homeless, and they're in an area of growing crime from gangsters close to these speakeasies, doss houses, and where illegal alcohol is sold. A recipe for disaster.
Yeah, for sure.
So 5 years after the hotel opening, all these things combined changed that area greatly. And so the hotel, the street that it's on, it slowly sort of become absorbed into the Skid Row area, so to speak. And so the clientele that it attracted also changed. We touched on Skid Row throughout this podcast. So I think let's just finally talk about what Skid Row is and the impact that's had on the Cecil Hotel.
Okay.
So it's not unique to LA. There's Skid Rows throughout America, but I think...
it's like a term that people just have in each city. Like, oh, go down Skid Row. It's not unique. That's surprising to me.
Yeah, I think Los Angeles has the most famous, is the Skid Row, I guess. But the terminology comes from the logging era.
The logging?
Yeah, it's something that, I guess, how they sort of built up areas, I think, a few hundred years ago or something like that in America. They would drag these logs against these sort of greased skids, or as a way of kind of transporting logs around. And so that's why the skid terminology came from, loosely.
Sure, but how does that associate with like decrepitness and like rundownness and stuff?
Well,
does that come later on?
Well, near these areas, there'd be these single room occupancy hotels for traveling workers coming to the city to find work. And they were always really close to these sort of railroads, I guess, that were being built. And so when the Great Depression hit, along with Prohibition, the area grew in size and people that had just moved to LA were without a job. You also had a lot of veterans returning from World War II and the Korean War that were coming back to the US via LA. And they had PTSD and suffering with addiction and other mental health issues. They didn't necessarily have a job to go to. And so they found themselves on the street as well. And so whilst the hotel was doing okay throughout the 30s and 40s, even though it had all the suicides, by the 50s and 60s, there's a bigger shift because many residential hotels in Skid Row fell into disrepair. And that meant that affordable permanent housing was really hard to come by for those that were in that area. And that forced more people onto the streets. And so in the 70s, there was also a conscious decision to preserve the remaining affordable home options in Skid Row to provide a place for those on low income to live.
Right.
On one hand, this helped because it made sure people had homes. But also what it did is whilst the council were building other areas in the city with these big skyscrapers, the financial district, etc., they didn't want these other little Skid Rows popping up. They wanted to keep it confined into this particular area to stop more homeless spreading. So that had a negative impact. And so you've got these 50-block radius of these people that are being detained, if you will, kind of like an invisible wall.
Right, yeah.
And what they did is they put harsh prison lighting around the area. And they'd also put blocks on trash cans to deter people from raiding bins outside of the area, so to keep them in, and that harsh lighting was almost like, you
don't want to be around it.
Yeah. And so the Cecil falls within these borders, and that is why it's had such a troubled past for the last 10 decades.
I imagine, like a lot of the people that are living in Skid Row, they eventually come across a bit of money, they maybe sell a bit of drugs, they maybe rob the right person, they get a bit of money, they check into the hotel, they have a shower, they have a nice bed for the night. But what comes with these people is essentially the trouble, right? And it just so happens that proximity-wise, it's on that Skid Row section as well. So it's attracting the people.
Exactly. What started as a mid-luxury travelers hotel ran into issues because of the economy and its location in LA and the way Skid Row has been looked after since the mid-20th century. So this has all increased the danger, the drugs, the violence. And so in answer to my original question that I started the podcast with, is the Cecil Hotel cursed? Well, yes, it is, but not through paranormal activity, but just from pretty bad luck.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And finally, as for Skid Row, it's still incredibly dangerous. It's not advised to go there, particularly at night, and it's not uncommon to come across someone that's overdosed, a body, people are high in the streets. And with 10,000 people living in that area, there are these outreach programs and mental illness centers to help those. You can even go and get fentanyl to make sure that you get some kind of opioid into your system.
Well, so they give you like a safe dose?
Yes. I was watching these videos and you go into the store and you just ask for it. I think it's free and it's to stop you from having, because I think if you have a withdrawal from heroin, it can be very serious.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand of heroin kind of, what do you call it? Like withdrawal symptoms, it looks horrible.
Yeah.
You get itchy, you can't calm down, you're sweaty, you're freaking out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's terrible. So they do support there. There is mental health treatment centers and things. But whether anything will truly get done to get these people off the street, I'm not too sure. But maybe some of them will find their way into the newly reopened Cecil Hotel. It's been identified as a historical cultural monument protected by Los Angeles City Council, and it's been reopened as affordable housing for permanent residents.
Wow. So, okay. So the whole thing is now... What happened to the manager that was there for like 10 years?
I'm guessing she's at another hotel.
Yeah.
I'd want to be working at a hotel near a beach or something.
Sure.
Completely different sort of
Yeah.
worlds apart.
Well, so it's still going. At least it hasn't shut down yet because it's right there on the outskirts of Skid Row.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense to have it as something for these people.
I think so.
For affordable housing.
There is good that can be done with that place. And especially if they've got rid of all these other hotels and housing, and that can house 700 people potentially, then they need it.
Yeah.
But it does make me think, unless things drastically change in Skid Row, then the curse is probably not over yet.
No, it's not, is it?
But that's it. That's my story.
And that is the story of the Cecil Hotel or Cecil Hotel.
Yeah, the curse of Cecil Hotel.
It was good. Lots of suicides. That's surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is probably why they ended up putting Bibles in hotels, right?
Yeah, and I guess why hotel rooms, you can't open the window in the hotel rooms anymore, can you?
No. Well, not in the ones in some of the UK ones that we go to in the UK. They're like tethered to that little tiny white wire, aren't they?
You can open it like an inch.
Yeah, just get a little whiff of air and that's it.
Yeah.
Nope, no more.
No more.
But I guess, yeah, stop people jumping out, right?
Yeah.
Probably don't have the liability insurance.
Yeah, and I never knew about the Bible thing. That makes sense because I just thought we were predominantly a Christian country.
Well, it was in America that it started like 1899, where the kind of Christian evangelical movement were pushing to put these Bibles in hotels for people that were traveling that were maybe lonely or needed some kind of emotional support and stuff. But then also, as a consequence as well, it's also there to potentially save some people who are wanting to commit suicide.
They're lost. Yeah.
I don't know how it convinces you to not do it, but maybe it can give you some comfort in those final moments, right?
Yeah, or maybe there's a chapter that speaks to you. Who knows?
Yeah, possibly. But yeah, that was really good. Thank you very much.
All right.
So I guess that's another episode for the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and leave us a cheeky 5-star review. You can also engage with us on Instagram or visit us on our new website at thecompendiumpodcast.com. We always love hearing from you, so check that out. And remember, we release every Tuesday, so join us next week as we unravel yet another intriguing story from the world of the fascinating and intriguing. And until then, see you next week.